cloisters and plain song and people praying and meditating very quietly. But in Saxon times, it was much harder. It was a really tough job. To start with, the monks would have lived in huts just like these, and they too would have had to build them themselves. They had to make their own bread, and they also had to do their own ploughing. In fact, the worst part of being a monk was that they had to do everything that everyone else had to do, and they had the day job. Well, this is a far cry from the medieval cloister, isn't it?
Indeed it is, yes.
Is this it?
This is exactly it, a Dark Age monk's cell. Well, what you see is what you get.
No furniture?
No furniture. Bit of blanket perhaps for a bed, on top of straw, few eating irons, you know, drinking vessel, plate, knife to cut your bread, and that was it. And very, very strict prayer regime, and all the other work they had to do as well.
How many times did they have to pray?
About 8 times in a 24-hour period.
And this isn't just hands together, eyes closed, this is down the church?
Down to the church, yes. And they were stipulated exactly at the regular hours throughout the day.
What times?
Starting just after midnight. Bear in mind, of course, they didn't go to bed quite as late as we did. Just after midnight, then about 3:30 in the morning, then later at 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock in the morning was called the first hour of daylight, when they'd have their prayers and then they'd go off to work. And then straight after that, you'd have 9 o'clock time, then midday, and then about 5:30 in the afternoon. And then later, the late prayers before they went to bed. Went to bed about 8 o'clock, you say?
What happened if you just gave it a miss and slept in?
Oh, that was just a definite no-no. Punishments were quite strict, quite severe. Anything, even being late for a service would have meant severe punishments.
What do you mean by punishments?
There were various types of punishments. For the lesser faults, you would almost certainly have to prostrate yourself in front of the brethren. This was called making the vania.
What do you mean by prostrate yourself?
Well, I mean, would you like to demonstrate?
Yes.
Well, there's some straw down there.
Yeah.
What you do is lie yourself down with your arms outstretched, like that, on your front, on your that's right, like that, arms outstretched, and that's where you would be, and the abbot and all the others would be around you, and you would stay there until such time as the abbot thought that you've had enough.
Roughly how long? It
could be, you know, as long as that particular gathering was in session. So you could be talking up to hours, perhaps.
I don't think my sin was particularly grave.
No.
What other punishments were there?
For the gravest of offences, you could, of course, be thrown out of the monastery.
Doesn't sound too bad a punishment to me.
Well, it might have been a really good thing if you were that sort of person and you just didn't really want to do it anyway. But if you were that sort of person, how would you fare in Saxon life? You know, you wouldn't really ever get on anyway, would you? Really?
This is St Cuthbert. Famous monks like him weren't in trouble that often, but their lives were still very hard, and some of it was accepted as a big part of the job. One of the worst parts of the job of being a monk has got to be atonement. This was the process whereby you suffered as a monk in order to try and prevent other people in your community from going to hell. There were lots of different forms of suffering, but one of the things that Cuthbert did was that he used to wade out into the sea, sometimes in the middle of winter and in the freezing cold, and he'd pray for up to 7 or 8 hours at a time. He did it in secret, but people saw him and he became very famous for it. I don't know if it actually stopped anybody going to hell or not, but what we do know is that within 300 years, the entire country was Christian. I'll tell you what, that was really cold. The worst job of being a monk, though, was the writing. Great writers like the Venerable Bede give us a lot of our history of the period. But most monks didn't really write as much as just copy texts, which was far more boring. The danger of making mistakes was always there. Remember all those punishments? And they worked in cold conditions. Because they didn't have much light, they usually worked by open doors or windows. Remember, they didn't have glass, so they were always cold. One Benedictine monk wrote, "Writing tires the eyes, wearies the back, and sends cramps through the arms and legs. But the worst part, that was the danger. Because of the valuable books, monasteries were a prime target for raiders. The biggest danger facing many people in Saxon times was the Vikings. The Vikings began raiding Britain in the 790s. Although they started out as raiders, once here they began to settle down. Eventually they created their own kingdom, the Danelaw, stretching from East Anglia up to Yorkshire and beyond. The thing about the Vikings is that we have such a generalised view of them. They were these great hairy men who sailed across the sea in order to hack us to pieces, rape our women and set fire to our churches. But there was much more to them than that. Welcome to the worst job of the Viking warrior. Now, when I think of Viking boats, I think of pretty large ships with a dozen or so people rowing and the rest hanging around being carried to battle. It's fine when the wind's up and you can raise the sail, it fairly clips along. But I didn't think it would be like this. Just room for about 16 of us, and we're all rowing. What would life have been like on the boat?
Well, it would have been pretty cramped and uncomfortable. As you can see, we're pretty tight in here, even as it is, and it's a lovely day. If we were going across the North Sea or the Atlantic on a rough day, we'd have water spraying all over us, and of course we wouldn't just be rowing in the afternoon. We'd have the problem of we'd be here all night, so you've got to sleep in this space. We'd all be huddled down between the sea chests, no privacy, so it'd be cold, wet, probably extremely smelly. And remember, no toilet facilities. You've just got the side of the boat.
Were there really women Viking sailors?
There's at least one reference to a Viking army coming across from the continent to England, bringing the women with them. But for the longer voyages, when they went out to settle in the North Atlantic, settling in the Faroes and Iceland and so on, they took their whole families with them. The women would certainly have been on the boat, and the chances are they'd have done their share of the rowing as well.
Pull! Pull! Slow and deep! Pull! 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 Keep it together! Pull!
Given how tough this is, it's impossible to imagine how you could do it for 2 or 3 days in a squall with very little to eat, no toilet facilities. And I know I'm the crappiest rower in the world, but this isn't the worst job. I don't know what it is. So we've been rowing and bailing out for 2 days and 2 nights. Finally, land ahoy, and we want to get over here somewhere. So we've got 2 alternatives. We can either sail all the way round this headland, about 20 miles, till we come to here, or we can carry the boat over this hill. This process was called portage. It was a common Viking practice. The 2 key aspects to it were speed, how quickly can this be done, and caring for the boat. Viking ships were made from single planks split radially from very long trees. Building them was tricky and time-consuming, so repairs away from home were not a good idea. But more importantly, the ship was also a spiritual symbol. Important Viking